My name is Lorraine Van Kerkhoff. I'm the Director of the Institute for Water Futures here at the ANU, and it's so exciting to see you all here. We're going to start off our World Water Day proceedings today by handing over to Auntie Dr. Matilda House. Great privilege to have you here, and I always learn so much from you when we hear you speak. So, Dr. Auntie Matilda House, over to you. Thank you.
Do I need it? No. No. It's fine. I'm a bit wobbly, but don't worry about it. It comes with when you're so young and you forget who you are later in life. But anyway, I'm so pleased to know that such wonderful people are here today, and for myself to be here to welcome each and every one of you into this beautiful land of my ancestors. And all our beautiful rivers. I can't believe that the waters. I lived in water. You can call me muddy. We call ourselves muddy. Blacks who lived on the river, swam in the river, we muddy. Swim in that water, in the river. Those who had the benefits of having a beautiful beach, like some people, we call them salty, and that's how we look at each other when we are all around the place. But, I can never not ever talk about rivers, I was born in a little town, and the river that was there was called the Lachlan. It was called after a colonialism, but to us it's called the Clare, in Wiradjuri language. And here in Queanbeyan, the Queanbeyan River, our beautiful river there, we call that Jangalang. Jangalang ran into the Menangla, which came down all the way from a place called Captain's Flat. But anyways, someone else will tell you about Captain's Flat. I can then go on how that came into Jangalang. They all met up and went to the mighty Menangla. But that river is still there, even though they put a lake on the top of it. The colonialistic of our lives, when people can do that to our wonderful rivers. But I always tell the children when they want to go doing a bit of fishing in a river, in the lake, all you seem to get is European carp, which some people love to eat anyway. But that mighty beautiful river of the Menangla, all them rivers ran into one, and of course it met up down here with the mighty Moggridge, where we get our beautiful, beautiful cod from. It runs into the Murray, and then that mighty river. Out comes from that is the beautiful Murray cod, big fish. So we still have ways of sustaining our lives. I was there when that lake was being filled and knowing all the wonderful things that happened on that river, the Menangla, and the middens that were there. The middens, can you imagine? All the shellfish. People don't understand and know when you talk about shellfish. They're still there. They were all taken by the dam. The dams that built there now. There's the Scrivener Dam. The Menangla runs into it. And the reeds that we have there, as this lady can tell you, we weave with them. So it sustained us through the bargaining and the sharing our culture with other people who came across from all over. And that's how Aboriginal people, you know, shared what their country is. And it all came through water, beautiful water. And the beautiful fish that we had in there that sustained us. Even though my children are all grown up now, they still remember being part of living on a river and in a river. Because, you know, black kids, like, you can't keep them away from water. Or when you think of it, any kid. Once they see that water, they want to dip that toe in, and they're off. And this is how we sustain our culture, our lives, and how we make our lives to go with others and to join up. And that's how the rivers are. We all join up. Somewhere along the line, our rivers all join up with each other. And they go out to that beautiful oceans. So, you know, rivers to me is something that I've grown up with, lived in, and have taught my children, my grandchildren, and now I've got 8 great-grandchildren. And that's their lives. They don't want to do fishing, would you believe it? My 2 eldest grandsons, Michael and Christopher. No, we want to go fishing on a river because at least we might get something there, because they're sick of pulling European carp out of the lake. But you know, that's how life still struggles on. And now the things that were brought into this beautiful land of Australia just to get rid of another pest. So we get these pests chasing pests and the others chasing pests, and we're chasing the pests to get rid of them. So there you go. But I want to say to you, I know that you are all here to talk about the things of saving the drips and the drops and whatever. But we've got to teach our children the culture. I don't care whether you're black or white. You've got a culture. And that culture will always be there to sustain the future of this beautiful land, no matter where we are. And I want to thank these beautiful people here. Each and every one of them. Look at them. You're gorgeous, darling. I see you around all the time, you know. Look at it. He's, well, you know, if you noticed our hair's gone funny now. So whenever we, you know, run into him, I was thinking, oh, see him again, you know. But I want to thank you for having me in, this beautiful lady from the desert.
Close, desert meets the sea.
Yeah, God, isn't it gorgeous? And you're not a movie star, are you? Not yet.
Well, that's why I'm really generous.
Yeah. And the lady, beautiful lady next to you. So each and every one of us, we learn, we teach, and we always maintain what we have done and learned to make sure that the future for our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, no matter who you are, will always be sustained, looked after and be kept. So welcome to this beautiful land that my son called Mambury, Wiradjuri, Wallabaloo, and anything you want to throw in. You know, we have walk-in people who just want to name it as well. So we keep our faith to our culture. We know it. We live by it. And we embrace it. That's how we know our culture and who we are. So thank you very much for having me here to be here with such wonderful, wonderful people, gorgeous creatures all over. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. I'm going home to have a nanny nap.
Right. Thank you so much, Auntie Dr. Matilda House. It's always such an honour, such a privilege to have you welcome us onto your country and acknowledge that we're on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to all the elders past and present. So, as I mentioned, my name is Lorraine Van Kerkhoff and I'm the Director of the Institute for Water Futures, and it's such a great privilege and pleasure to have you all with us here, and not least our fabulous panellists. The context for getting together today, of course, is that it's World Water Day. So happy World Water Day, everyone. And as you may be aware, the theme for World Water Day this year is Water for Peace. World Water Day is declared by the United Nations and is an opportunity to celebrate all things water. But of course, the idea of water for peace, it's very UN, isn't it? It's very broad and aspirational and abstract. And as we were thinking about this, started wondering, well, what does that mean in Australia in 2024 to be thinking about water for peace? And in part of our pondering, we realised that this wonderful panel, this gorgeous panel, as we've just heard, are just exactly the people that we need to turn to in order to explore this idea of what water for peace may mean in Australia in 2024. I'm going to introduce our panellists briefly, and then I'm going to pass over to them to share their thoughts and ideas and ways forward. And we'll go from there. We will have time for questions at the end, so please do hold those questions, and we will take those as we get to that point. So first on our panel speaking today is Associate Professor Bradley Moggridge. Bradley is a Kamilaroi man, an environmental hydrogeologist, and currently Associate Professor in Indigenous Water Science at the University of Canberra's Centre for Applied Water Science. And his research focuses on how traditional knowledge of water can be better utilised in Western water management. So welcome, Bradley. Great to have you. Unfortunately, Melissa Kennedy, who was on our program, is a late apology. She was going to be Zooming in from home and she's unable to join us. So we'll just note that Mel's unable to join us today. And then move on straight away then to Warren. So Warren Martin is a Burramatigal man and Director of Consultancy at the I2I Global Company. And this is a majority-owned Aboriginal company which optimises employment of Indigenous people and enhances Indigenous business capabilities. And Warren has a long track record of successfully engaging and partnering Indigenous communities with key stakeholders to co-design and co-deliver place-based initiatives, including working with the ANU, which has been fabulous to have you involved. And we have last in our lineup today, Professor Anne Poelina. Anne is is it Naikina? Correct me. Nikina Warawa, woman from the Kimberley. Anne is Chair of Indigenous Knowledges and Senior Research Fellow at the Noongar Institute at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. She's Chair of the Marawarra Fitzroy River Council, an active community leader and human and earth rights advocate. Anne's work focuses on issues around environmental and cultural protection in the Kimberley. Please join me in welcoming all of our wonderful panellists. So as I mentioned, Brad, your first cab off the rank today. And as I said, we're thinking about this idea of water for peace in Australia in 2024, and thinking about the First Nations experience of being water leaders, water managers, water scientists, water researchers. What's your view on what does this mean for us in this time and in this place? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a cracking question. When I sort of started thinking about it, and you think, it's very UN talk, but I suppose for me, I can only talk on behalf of Kamilaroi people. Well, I can't talk on behalf, but talk with Kamilaroi people as my ancestors, and obviously, we have a strong connection to water. I think we've got 14 rivers and many groundwater systems. We have the Great Artesian Basin under our country and things like that. So it's, when you think about water for peace, there can be no peace without justice. That's what I reckon. Because how long have I got? A couple of hours?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. 7 minutes. Okay. Thinking about that, like you look at the history of water in this country, and it hasn't been a good history, especially with water and Aboriginal people. So a lot of our water was forcibly taken from us. So water for peace is water that should exist without conflict. A lot of the other talk is around transboundary, but then when you look at how Australia was invaded and colonised, we're trans-colony. So when you think about the Murray-Darling Basin, it's trans-colony, it's not transboundary. It's within one country, but it's across a number of colonies. And so I suppose the challenge is that each of those colonies has its own laws and regulations around how water is shared and managed and distributed. But then you look at the history, we were pushed under, my mum, for instance, and grandparents, they were pushed under missions and reserves. And so all their rights, so that was forcible removal, and I suppose that's that conflict around water, onto missions and reserves, and all their rights to land and water were taken away from them. And so I suppose as the frontier moved across, taking land and accessing water, the water management has become a thing in Australia. It's it's 150 years old, let's say. And you look at Murray-Darling Basin management, and the way it was shared was purely to protect the settler within that colony. And I suppose you look at water management today, and it's still the same colonial settler laws that protect it. And I have no doubt that, I know this might ruffle a few feathers, but governments and water law is there to protect the settler. And I suppose that's a real challenge. We are not seen as stakeholders in water, and I suppose that'll never bring peace because we don't have access to our waters. And Aunt was talking about accessing water when she was young, and the same. I used to play in a creek that sometimes was bright yellow, and that was from chromium. Some days it was white from paint. So I suppose it's, you think back, I used to collect tadpoles, and that was sort of my early interactions. But then when I talked to some of my elders on water on our country, it was clear back in the old days. And you have elders now saying, I have to take bottled water to go fishing, and all I catch is, as Aunt said, bloody carp. And so I suppose that sort of, how can you have peace when that sort of scenario is in existence in this country? And, it's a bugbear for us. We're continuing the fight and trying to build evidence that, I see that's my calling in life, to try and build evidence to shape, to influence, to educate policy, to hopefully one day change legislation, and I think, we're moving to a point where there's some good talk happening in this space, and that could lead to some peace. But when you think about the Murray-Darling Basin, $13 billion compared to $40 million given to Aboriginal people for entitlements, when a lot of those landholders were given water for nothing. And there's some states, Northern Territory, you still don't have to pay. WA, I don't know, do you pay in WA for water entitlement? So those sort of scenarios exist where people get water for nothing, and then when you bring in a licensing system and water trading, and then you want to adjust their water licence, then they're the first to blow up. And they're the ones that want compensation, all that sort of stuff. So for Aboriginal people, when we became human in the late 60s, or counted as humans, just before I was born just after that, so I was born a human, and counted. But I think the challenge is always that when we talk about emerging elders, but when we emerged from the missions and reserves, all the good land and water was gone. So then our fight for land and water is still today. You know, there's land rights and native title for land, but we'll never get native title for water unless that act changes, unless there's compensatory water for the stolen. You know, there's no treaty, so we don't have veto powers. What else is there? And if we want water, we have to go to a market and find it in an already over-allocated system. So we're up against it anyway. And I think it's a real challenge, and I think we won't have peace until there's justice. Like, you know, there's licensees that have water entitlements, and they take more water. You know, they steal water, purposely knowing that the fines that they're going to get won't even meet what they're going to make out of whatever crop or whatever cattle they're going to graze with this water. And then, you know, the other opportunity could be restorative justice, you know, restorative water. You know, when a water holder or entitlement holder breaks the law, breaks the rules of that water, turns off their meters, and somehow their storages are full and their meters on zero, magic. But if, you know, with all the tools that the regulators have these days, there's an opportunity for say, no, it's up to the courts and obviously the water regulators to say, no, come on, you've just abused the law. You'll become way too greedy. We're going to take your water off it. We're going to give it to Aboriginal people. Just imagine the uproar. But restorative justice of water could be a way to stop these people being so greedy. I don't know. That's just a couple of ideas.
I'm going to pass on now to Warren. There's a lot of ideas in there that you can follow up.
Yeah, wow. Thanks, brother. Really interesting that the in the middle there you talked about that the water's for the colonisers, and my experience in the water space as a consultant has been engaging with First Nations stakeholders around Part 14 advice with the water resource plans. So going out with a water resource plan made by the state, speaking to the communities and the stakeholders around their Indigenous rights, were they upheld, were they respected with the process that's done, and reporting that back to the Basin Authority before the Minister makes a decision to approve the water resource plan or not. And thinking about, you know, coming here today and you know, what's my role and where do I sit here, and I think my role is to bring the voice of all those people that I've spoken to out, and there's some really key themes. First of all, I'll go to that point that Brother Brad made about waters for the colonisers, and I'll go to a conversation I had about 3.5 weeks ago in Wilcannia. I'm sitting there with 3 community members, an elder and a couple other people, and they said, we wish we had irrigators in Wilcannia. I said, what? You crazy? No, we wish we had irrigators in Wilcannia. They said there's no irrigators from just above Louth down to Menindee. So what that means is no one cares about this part of the river. It's putrid. It's an inconvenience for the irrigators and government that the water has to come through Wilcannia to get to its next sale point. Right? So they're saying that if they had irrigators in Wilcannia, that power and influence of the colonisation and the money, they would have better water. Then I went on to conversations about that they're on bore water there now. So we're seeing a new intergenerational diseases and that, which have never been seen before, eczema in kids, things like that. So we talk about, water and that, and justice. And those people, talked the same about when they were kids, they swam in the rivers and that. One of the ladies there, she was in her mid-30s. She had a handful of chronic diseases. She doesn't expect to live past 42 years of age. Because of these diseases. And they attribute to that. They can't get in the river when it's hot in summer. the kids get banned from the pool or whatever. There's the mental health issues, the social issues, and that comes from there. You mean, they talk about suicides and that. This is how deep this water justice goes, and the rivers, simply because they don't have access to decent clean water. So further up the river, go up around Mungandai and that, we're having a different conversation. When we get to Wilkenya, they don't care how much water's there, they just want some decent water. I went down to the bridge to take some pictures, and it was a horrendous green and the smell was terrible. They talk about that the water's treated to a level where it's good for consumption, but when it's heated up for a shower, it still smells that bad that you can't stand under the shower. So they don't shower. They go outside under the hose. And that's pretty ordinary in 2024. Yeah. So if we talk about justice and we talk about health and well-being, something as fundamental as the river that runs through the town, what hope do we have for all the other closing the gap stuff? There's nowhere to start with that. The other thing that is around dignifying the rights of First Nations people. There's a raft of policies and stuff in place already, but the abuse and the power imbalance in the use, the way that government uses, excuse me, that current legislation and policies is absurd. 5.5 years for the state to develop a water resource plan, 6 weeks for me to find stakeholders, engage them, and them to make a decision whether they agree with it or not. 5.5 years for the state, with all the bureaucrats and all the great minds and the benefits of science and all those things. 6 weeks for 12 communities of Aboriginal people to go through a 278-page document and tell the Commonwealth Minister whether they agree that the First Nation needs have been met. That's the ultimate abuse of power. So I guess that's the perspective I come here from today, you know what I mean? Part 14 advice, it only says that the government may have regard for First Nations people. That's, you know, I mean, that predates us being counted as humans. Like, may have regard, that's, I was in state government for 33 years before I went into the private sector, and I was just stunned. I didn't think there could possibly be a piece of legislation like that, but that's it. So to me, when we talk about well-being and all those sorts of things in relation to water, it comes back to dignity. First of all, give people some respect. You know, give them access to decent, clean, water that they can get in and have a swim and stuff like that. And it'll change a lot of things.
We're certainly hearing that equity and justice or injustice takes many forms in relation to water. I think that's a great point to carry across to our last speaker, Professor Anne Poelina.
Mababara, ngajunu nila wala Anne Poelina, ngayo imarwara manen, ngay mandajara nyigana nganga on this beautiful country. I want to acknowledge the voice of the people from this land, but also we see country as alive and very much an actor in what we do and say. So I just want to acknowledge country and the amazing people who have looked after this country from the beginning of time. This is a very interesting conversation, and I want to acknowledge also my colleagues here at the ANU, some who I haven't seen for over 15 years, which I just saw today. So it's all about dialogue. It's all about the conversation of where we're going as a nation, where we're going as critical thinkers and practitioners. When I introduced myself in my language, I said, Ngayui Madawara Manan, which means I am a woman who belongs to the Madawara, the Fitzroy River in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. This river has given us everything. In terms of property rights, the river owns us. It has given us our law, our stories, our memories, everything we know as human beings. I was quite excited several years ago when I heard about the Wanganui, the Whanganui being granted personhood. And I said to the other elders, I said, do you realise this river in New Zealand has been granted personhood? And they looked at me as if I was from another planet, and they said about the river, not a human being. The river is not a human being. So much of my work has been writing about ancestral personhood and the right for all of these family out there, the birds, the trees, the river, all of them to have a voice and a place in society. Because one of the things we say as Indigenous people is we cannot separate land, water and people. They are intrinsically entwined, and we must come from that sort of concept. When everything we see in the Western system is about silos. Somebody's dealing with land, somebody's dealing with water, someone's dealing with the environment. But what is really important to remember that prior to settlement, invasion, colonisation, there is a law for the land. There is already a law that exists that embeds in us these key principles of justice, of equity, of caring for everything around us from the perspective that we always governed on scale. We always governed from the perspective that we need to look after the commons for the greater common good of all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, for the birds, for the trees, for all of the things we see around us. So this is a really interesting concept, and it's very, very interesting in terms of the dialogue we're having here, but the dialogue that other leaders are having in terms of challenging the system and saying, we need to be brave. We need to get out there, have a voice, bring those that come with us. And I think one of the things that the law of the land talks about is self-regulation. These are the values, these are the ethics, these are the virtues that we negotiate human to human in care of everything around us. This is the way we want to live our lives as civil people in civil society. So it's a very interesting and totally different paradigm to Western law in terms of self-regulation. This is how we're going to live together. We don't need a law to say how we have to behave, but everything within the Western system is setting up legal frameworks so you can regulate people's behaviour. You can regulate how industry is to perform. You can regulate the contract from government. So it's a total different way of thinking, being, listening, hearing, and believing how you can move forward. So what we're talking about is a total different value set, total different way to see and be in the world. One of the things that leaders like myself are saying is that we are living in a world where we have to continue to care for everything and everyone around us. So this conversation is not just what are blackfellas doing, it's what are we doing collectively. The work that I do nationally, globally, can only be done by the new families that I've created, non-Indigenous people who come and believe that they want to contribute, they want to be part of the story, they want to be part of the way we deconstruct the society in which we live, which is really very much in the face of all of us right now with climate change. I talk about it as climate chaos because there's so much uncertainty. So we are, as leaders standing here or sitting here at the front, working with amazing people, most importantly, the people that give us the legitimacy to sit here and have a conversation with you. We are grounded in the people that we live with, we work with. All of the things that I have achieved, I mean, I came from a Western education that taught me I was dumb, I could never be anything or believe and be anything I wanted to be. And all my life I had that. And then one day somebody came along and said, I think you've got potential. Would you like to try something different? And so I have, but the most important point I want to make is it doesn't matter what all the tickets behind my name is. What I have learned is that I have to sit on the ground because I have nowhere else to fall. So be humble in terms of the knowledge that you acquire. Be really prepared to share that. Lift the younger ones up so that they can start to lead as well. So I come from a world where we are focused very much on eco, not ego. And so everyone is equal. And so today we must think about what are the systems that we are creating that bring all of us to the table. What does procedural and distributive justice really look like when we're talking about developing these sorts of stories around water take, water regulation, water policy? What does that really look like at the end of the day? And for me, it is about all of us. It is about looking at everyone in the region and believing that there is what I call a coalition of hope that we are building that keeps me waking up every day and believing that we can transform the systems. Most importantly, to realise that Indigenous people in this country manage the oldest water industry in the world from the beginning of time. And if we are talking about looking at complexity and system science thinking, if you do not have Indigenous leaders working with you, showing you how to change your frame, looking at the world a different way, you will never transform it. And so what we're saying as Indigenous leaders is that we've navigated our way through the complexity of these systems. We've acquired the tickets that we've got to give us standing in the Western world. But at the end of the day, we are most accountable firstly to country, firstly to the rivers and the living water systems that give us life, whole life, and generate all of the things that we need to do to have a full life and a good life. So for me, the story is very much around looking at, one of the things I wasn't going to talk about was the fact that I'm sitting here in a role as an Associate Commissioner for Water with the National Water Initiative, doing a job that normally takes 15 months in 4 months, talking to everyone across this country in terms of regulators, policymakers, scientists, government. And what I am seeing, if I was to take a eagle-eye view, is the fact that we do not have good bicultural, bioregional governments on scale anywhere in this country. And until we can do that, we cannot be prepared to keep on making the same mistakes that we're making with the MDB or any other system that we're looking at working with. So there is a law of the land that exists. We want you as fellow Australians to really start to see that this is your home. How do you grow an ethics of care and love for place, for country? How do you situate yourself within a space and get to know that place? And a lot of people go, oh, well, coming to the Kimberleys. I said, no, country is where you are. Doesn't matter it's concrete, it's still country. And so how do we start to sit around and have these sorts of conversations and bring in all the different ways that we can look at how do we deal with water in this country? And what we're saying is that the voices that need to come into the decision-making process, even an earlier conversation I had today was, who has the right to form the questions that you want to explore? What does bottom-up governance mean when we live in a system that's so centralised and toxic and so full of such pain that we kind of go, where are we going in a time of great uncertainty? So the two big issues that are on the table with the National Water Initiative is considering what does Indigenous people's voice mean in terms of water rights. Importantly, the other really impacting common denominator is around climate change. Climate change is real. It is happening whether we like it or not. We as human beings have actually created the situation we are living in. So it is up to us as human beings. And to be a human being is a great privilege. To be able to think, to have reason, to question right from wrong, to think about what does justice mean for the people who are most disempowered, who own this beautiful country before settler society came. But most importantly, in order to get peace, it is extremely difficult for people like myself who are continuously invaded with unjust development. Colonialism has not gone away. It is a reality of which we live right now, today. And so when you look at these sorts of conversations around how do you create dialogue, how do you create this opportunity to give voice to people from country, with country? As I said, I'm a realist. I live in a world that is very complex, but also very beautiful. And right now we have got a very interesting state government. And in a way, a new word that I've come to know within the Commission is, are we backsliding or are we moving forward? West Australia is a very, very complex place. We've just decided that we're not proceeding with water laws there. I write about this as lawful, awful laws. Laws that create injustice, not just to Indigenous people, but injustice to fellow human beings. Because what we are talking about are public interest matters. These are matters that involve all of us here, so there's no backing away. So water is an amazing story. It is a living entity, whether you're in the desert and have to dig down so many metres to get that water. We in the Kimberley, we talk about it as living water because these systems have not been fully allocated, so they're still alive. They're still moving with us. They're still breathing with us. As I said, the Fitzroy River has given us everything, including our law. So just going back to how did we have peace, and it's very, very interesting because in 1618, Italian map maker painted a picture of the Kimberley, and in it he wrote in Italian, land of peace. So we could not have existed in this country always being warlike. We had ways that we could manage the rogues, but we traversed this country. We travelled down this way for the Bogong Moss. We went across to Laura and danced with Cape York and those people. So the stories and these songlines of our people have traversed this country. And as Auntie Matilda said, the rivers are connected. When you talk about these systems with old people, and then, you know, I'm trying to explain to them about aquifers, and they go, oh, yeah, we want to tell you about old water, because they know it takes thousands of years to recharge. We're looking at systems that are geothermal activity because people want to frack around there, and the old people say, oh, if you're going to frack there, that poison's going to go down here and it's going to travel along in the tunnel. And I'm trying to think, tunnels? And I say to a geologist, and he says, yes, we call it capillaries. So this wisdom is existing. It is here, still alive, and very much at the forefront of the work that we do as Indigenous leaders on the ground, because we cannot do what we do without that. And so what we're saying is that this Indigenous knowledge, this Indigenous system, the way we govern from the beginning of time, always on scale, always from a bioregional perspective, always thinking about relationship, respect, reciprocity, rights, but also responsibilities and duty of care to care about everything and everyone around you. So we are in a moment in time in this country where I think we have a real serious failure of leadership at each level of government and governance. And I think the people are what we call, we have a saying called wake up the snake. How do you wake up the consciousness of the people to bring the people with you? So this is a moment in time where we are looking at a whole range of things, particularly where I come from in the Kimberley. We're looking at how do we care about everyone and everything around us, which now includes settler society. We're publishing extensively to say that these ways that we can govern have been written in our minds, in our heart, in what we call our lian, our spirit from the beginning of time. It is time for us to find a mechanism for healing, for moving forward in a spirit of goodwill and true reconciliation. And the voice must be the voice of us as a nation, collectively together, thinking how can we transform these systems that are failing each and every one of us sitting in the room. So what we're saying is that we're here having a dialogue. This is a really unusual time to be able to get three of us to be here in the same place at the same time. It's an opportunity. I go with the theory that if a door opens, I'll walk in. I have picked a door that has opened, and I have learnt so much in terms of the role that I have with the Commission, because we have seen everything going on in this country and it's not a good story. And so the two big issues in the frame needs to be how do we amplify not just the voice or the interest of Aboriginal people, but the rights of Indigenous people, because from what my elders say, we own this water. One of the elders who recently passed away not so long ago, he said, how can government think they own the water? They were never born alongside of the river. We've been here from the beginning of time. We own this water. And so the story is really the collectiveness now really is all of us together. We have to bring all of the ways we see and be in the world to look at what does justice mean? How can we as a nation come together and heal this and not go with the word of reconciliation if you're not serious about this? One of the things I say to IPBES and IUCN is that they've spotlighted that 80% of the world's biodiversity is held under the guardianship of Indigenous people. That's a great frame, but we need investment to transform these systems. And so not just spotlighting us, but providing us with the tools, the resources to transform the system, because the cost benefit to everyone is great. So it's an exciting time. We hope you've got some challenging questions. And we want to open this up because dialogue is two-way. It's not just us sitting up here talking to you, but stimulating some thought within you to sort of ask us some hard questions. But, you know, it's all about networking. And I'm very, very proud to be part of this systems thinking at the ANU, to be part of the Water Justice Hub, to know people like Catherine and John and Quentin and Zappa and all of these good people who really believe in what they're doing. And remember what I said was the common denominator is values, ethics and virtues. And if you hold those core values that I spoke about, we can have a dialogue. We can walk forward in a way of peace and build this together, because we are all responsible for how this country is foreshadowed to the world. And I think this is part of waking up the snake. And I feel very confident that I'm building a coalition of hope for my people, for our river, for different ways to see and be in the world, because it's time for a total reset. It's time to do business differently. And water is a very key element. It is many, many things, but we have held it. We have looked after it from the beginning of time. And we have a duty of care as Indigenous water leaders to be standing and holding this space, sharing with our people, amplifying their voices, importantly, amplifying the voices of rivers nationally, globally, and in our place-based places, because it's time to do business differently if we're serious about creating peace. Kalia Mabu, thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers. What a spectacular range of comments. I'm going to return the floor back to Bradley initially to just any further reflections that might have come to mind in listening to Professor Anne Poelina or some of the other comments from Warren. I noticed particularly, Anne, you mentioned that sort of the potential or the, I guess in some senses also the risks of bringing Western science and Indigenous science together. But there's so much potential there to unlock that kind of coalition of hope that you mentioned. I wondered, Bradley, if you had any comments on that from your position, exploring those interconnections and helping to facilitate them.
So I have to follow Anne. Holy moly. Look, there is so much, I suppose it's the nodding of the head. You couldn't hear my head nod. If I had marbles in there, you would have heard it. But, and I think, I was just sort of thinking about, the knowledge and traditional knowledge and science can be a future to fix a lot of the problems. Because I suppose when we think about it, we can't keep getting the same society and the same people the money that have caused the problems. It's not going to get any better. You look at that 13 billion that went to, all those landholders to fix up their efficiencies and things on how to manage water, and all they did was, well, not all they did, but an example of what they did was they lowered the level of their irrigation channels to naturally use gravity to get water into their channels without using pumps. That's efficiency, but that should be water theft. They're stealing water from the river without the river even knowing. But also the challenge of knowledge and science. So the government's got at the moment the principles for science at the moment, and there's rumour that Indigenous knowledge could be part of the future of science, which would be a good step, but we haven't seen the detail, but it could be an opportunity where, there's two different knowledge sets, but potentially they're going alongside each other. One has priority and rights and dominance, I think as brother was saying, the dominant society, whereas ours is just going along quietly, looking for opportunities to fix and repair. It's part of our cultural obligation is to care for country. You know, it's built in. You know, survival's built in, but also how do we fix this place? And Aboriginal people aren't going anywhere. They're always been here and they're not going anywhere. So when everything's buggered up and the colony goes back to England, we'll be here to fix it up. You know, that's the thing. You know, the challenge is, you know, do we need a 200-year recovery plan for country and the rivers? So I suppose the opportunity for knowledge and science to work together is huge. But I think it's courage as well, definitely. Courage, and the culture of science has to change. You know, I know there's rigour and process and methodologies and replication, but that's what our mob have been doing since day one. That's why we're still here. That's why we've survived. It's on the driest inhabited continent on Earth. So we've survived, you know, Anne talked about climate change. We've survived it before, but we're not really part of the debate around adaptation or mitigation because, you know, the stories exist of moving to higher country when the sea level started to rise. So, you know, those sort of stories are still built into our people that are told and retold. So they're not myth and legend, they're observation and built from impact of country. And I suppose they've adapted already. You know, our people have adapted to country of what it's delivering. And so I suppose that connection, knowledge, understanding, observation and impact can be a part of our way forward. You know, we're here. As I said, we're not going anywhere. So, but also just thinking about the young ones as well. Like, how do we engage generations of kids that have gone through school systems and not seen themselves in the curricula? How do we build curricula where they're connected to and they're engaged and proud of because they see their people and the knowledge in the curricula? So, you know, that's a big challenge for education itself. You know, and then you think about, you know, remote parts of Australia where sometimes English might be fifth in a language group. But they're measured on their literacy and numeracy in English. But English is fifth. You know, they speak 4 other languages in front of English, you know, potentially. You know, that's an example. But, you know, how do we make sure that those kids get access to knowledge from their own people? They see themselves in the curricula, not Captain Cook. And we move forward to senior school, university, and then I suppose then we can sort of have a society that's purely informed from all the truth telling of this country, all the way through to understanding country. And I suppose that's the sort of hope I see, is that, you know, that we can start from, you know, preschool all the way to university, but also, you know, then universities need to think how can they, and science, you know, how can they see our knowledge as equal, not as a lesser, as equal. And, you know, the academies, for instance, you know, we've only just seen Aboriginal people come into the Academy of Science and the Academy of Science, Technology and Engineering. So there's a shift there, which is good, a good shift. But I suppose it's, you know, some of, you know, Anne or my elders that have all this knowledge, that's a PhD. They should be the doctors of the land. You know, they guide me on what I need to know about country. And I suppose, and country, it also has that voice as well, you know. So I think one of my, and Catherine's as well, you know, proud moment was allowing for Anne in one of her journal papers to have her river as first author in a scientific journal. Like, that's unbelievable. So I suppose that's a shift in that sort of thinking, but also an evolution of that journal as well, you know, a real big step. So, you know, those sort of opportunities are just starting to happen, but we're still here and we're going to keep going. Yeah.
Thank you. No, very, very good observations, and I guess we can feel that there are steps, there are positive signs when we look for them, still existing within those systems, as you say, that's really geared in completely the other direction. So yes, I think this kind of forum, yes, it is about trying to amplify, trying to learn more about those opportunities, as well as those positive directions that we can all collectively go in, which is so important. Warren, I'm going to come to you now for any further thoughts that you might have had in relation to both Anne and Bradley's comments. I mean, the one that struck me regarding the conversations that you've been having with people about water was Anne's comment about self-regulation in the care of everything around us, and who has the right to ask those questions, who has the right to be at the table to help make those decisions and make sure that the right questions are being asked. What kind of things have people been sharing with you, or what's your insights from the conversations that you've been having with people about water to think about, who are they asking the right questions, who should be asking those questions, and how might that happen?
I think I can probably best answer that through a very recent experience last week, where we were sent a piece of work by the Commonwealth around First Nations engagement for the Murray-Darling Basin review, 15-year review, whatever, to do First Nations engagement across the whole basin, so from Queensland right down through to Adelaide. And we were pretty excited. We knew it was coming, and I developed all these maps and this plan, and I had 76 communities mapped out that we anticipated that we would go to make sure that we spoke to all the right people. And we got the RFT, came through, I'm sitting there reading it, and I made a couple of phone calls. So what it said was that there'll be 6 workshops nominated by the Commonwealth. We don't need to organise any venues, anything. They will give us the invite list of who to send information to, and we need to be there and have a scribe for the day. So a non-First Nations person, I'm guessing, has decided who will be at the table, on what terms, what will be talked about, but they needed a black face to do it, right? Because it's got to be First Nations engagement, right? And that it wouldn't make for good LinkedIn moments to have a non-Aboriginal person doing it. But so much has happened and there's been so little progress, right? So how, it just stumps me how in 2024, closing the gap, all this, we hear about all the time, we're going to that engagement on the Murray-Darling Basin review after everything we've heard and learnt and all the rest of it. And then I'll go to stuff that Brad was just talking about there, and this is my own little theory, I call it the evolution of colonisation. So I went through the doing to phase, where it was done to First Nations people. Then I was doing for, we referred to it as that mission mentality, they'll save us. Now we're stuck in that allowing to do, right? And Professor Gregory Phillips refers to it as the white fence, right? You look, go over there and play, you just do this, this and this, and you just make all these decisions, but here are the clear boundaries, right? And then government takes and uses that. So they just can't get, well, not just government, but mainstream society can't get to that genuine partnership, that dignity, dignifying. So I listen, talk about the cultural sciences and the sciences and those opportunities, and we can, with due respect, we can educate our young people and we can bring people through and we can open up dialogue and all the rest of it. But if it's not equally valued, then we're not making progress. You know what I mean? And that's goes back to, I think that first part of the thing, 6 workshops. The community end to end has said, we don't do workshops. I mean, the first thing I thought was all the people that won't be able to get there. How many people? If it's off off-pay week, they won't have petrol money, you know what I mean? They won't even get considered, you know what I mean, and things like that. And it just takes the process so far back. So we're going to have a basin plan review completed in 18 months' time with a First Nations perspective or feedback from 6 workshops. Okay, so that product is not going to be anything close to expressing the genuine interests, beliefs and issues impacting First Nations people.
The concept of water for peace has taken us on a very wide-ranging journey, hasn't it? And I think that's entirely appropriate. I mean, that is what these big ideas around, you know, abstract concepts like peace should be enabling us to do. So thank you to everyone for your thoughtful and well-considered, well-expressed, beautifully articulated comments. We have time now to open up to some questions from the floor. We have about 20 minutes. If you have a question, there are microphones. There is a microphone, and we're going to ask people to come to the microphone. Sorry, long walk from the other end of the room. To come to the microphone to ask your question. Please do introduce yourself as you ask your question. And hopefully we will get through a few of these before we break. So, questions, please. And you can go, if you've got a question, feel free to go and wait at the microphone as well.
Hello, I'll be tall. Hi, I'm Amy Carrad. I'm from the School of Regulation and Global Governance, just down the road. Thank you. I mean, I could have done that, but I was just going to balance on my toes. It's like looking at Scotty after me, and Scotty's tall. Sorry. I guess you spoke a lot about frustrations, and I guess I hear them, and in some ways I see them in different spaces. But have you seen good stuff? Is there a model out there that you have seen working, whether locally or on a regional scale? Like, is there a happy story somewhere in Australia at the moment around water? Please.
I might just jump in there. I do have a happy story. So part of the work I've been doing, the first bit of work I did was border rivers stuff, so Queensland, New South Wales border. And what the communities along the border river spoke about in 2020, Queensland changed their human rights legislation, and it changed the way that government had to work with First Nations communities. And that was a significant turning point. So they went from, there was no more, nation delegates or community meetings or whatever. They went and they used what Queensland terms a community governance model. And I don't mind saying that I've jumped on the back of that and used that. Basically go into a community, speak to the community, how and why does this community work, who are your leaders. Some places land council, other places the elders, some places it's all of the above. And that really changed the relationship in that water conversation space with Queensland. So what the people along the borders will say, that it's less than perfect, and we don't always see eye to eye, but we've got a conversation and everyone has a voice in the water space in Queensland. Come to the other side of the broken line, and it's a very different conversation. So if I can offer that as a good, so that change in human rights and that change to engagement and approach has made a significant difference to the well-being, because those people now have an opportunity to participate.
I can see we have a few more questions lined up, but any quick comments on that from Anne or Brad before we move on?
Yeah, I think if someone said to me, "You're Prime Minister, what would you like to do?" I think one of the big problems that I see is that we haven't grown up as a nation. We're not free as a nation. And so how can you treat Indigenous people with dignity and respect? And the problem for me is the jurisdictions. So I'm a very firm believer of, making this a free country for all of us, abolishing the states and having regional government selecting and nominating. So my vision is a very big one, and a one that I'm dreaming about. One of the things that keeps me resilient and resourceful is I work in a concept called the waiting time. And as I wait, I meet new people and build networks and learn new information. And that helps me to transform the systems that I'm working with. So I believe that this country hasn't woken up yet. We are not a free country. So how can we treat Indigenous people with dignity and respect? So I'm dreaming that one day, and now that I have 2 grandsons, I'm hoping that this might happen in their time. But I think when I look at the conflict that we have, it's because how we formed the Federation. And I think the big issue is really the fact that the most important governance mechanism that we have in this country is local government, and it's not in the Constitution. And the history over the last 20 years has shown that with local government, what you need is economy of scale and a much wider opportunity to have dialogue. So I'm a strong believer of regional government and how we move towards a dream that one day this country will be free and that the citizens of this nation will remember that and treat us with dignity and respect and see our voices in there. I just want to go quickly back to the fact that Indigenous science is named as Indigenous science. It's been written about by Michael Christie up in the Northern Territory since the early 80s. Questacom 15 years ago, a critical think tank came together of Indigenous leaders and reframed that we can't be talking about science if we're not calling it and claiming it as Indigenous science. How can you be ignorant to the fact that we have got multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary science in our systems thinking as Indigenous leaders? So it's not an abstract concept. One of the things that a First Nation person said to me is that if you want to be a brave, you have to be brave. And so we have to push the boundaries. We have to create the knowledge that can expand this Western thinking and do all that. So there is good things happening. This is an institution that I have conflict with, but I have great peace with. There are people here that I could not have done the work I've done without their leadership, without their knowledge infiltrating my thinking. We have done many firsts. I was the first to publish an abstract in my Indigenous language. The Matawarra Fitzroy River is a prominent first author in all of our publications. So you've got to be brave, you've got to push the systems, you've got to expand it, but you bring the people with you and you can get that change. So I'll stop there and wait for the next question because I can see people lining up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, next question, please.
G'day, I'm Scotty from Co-ops, Commons and Communities Canberra and the New Economy Network of Australia's Canberra Regional Hub. We're working within an entire institutional structure of society that's sort of steering us and everything else towards ecocide, essentially, and fortunately, we're part of that eco. How can we get enough people to have that epiphany and see that as happening in front of us and switch over so that we can reach a tipping point where we get a cultural epiphany, an economic epiphany, a legal one and political one?
That's a big question. Who's going to take that on?
Yeah, no, I'll share that question with my friends on the panel. But, sometimes I look at this and I see all the reports from IPBEST and IUCN, and sometimes I think we can be a little testosterone out on science. I think we need a new way to tell the story to bring the people with us. And so much of the way that I communicate is through plays, through film, through storytelling. Because what you have to do is you have to touch the heart and the minds and what I call lian, the human spirit, and awaken that in other people. And sometimes these sterile journals don't get to where the meaning should be. So for me, I would say, Scotty, it's a way to, in a way, keep dreaming and tell the story a different way and use all the forms of media to bring the people with you, because it's the people that create the revolution. And if they haven't picked up the message, they're not coming with you on the journey. So I think using multimedia as a way to ground our work. And I'm seeing that more and more in scientific journals. I mean, most of our publications have got films embedded in them. We have amazing artists that paint a story that a 30,000 word journal couldn't tell. So it's about thinking creatively, thinking laterally, thinking about who is that person sitting on the ground that you're trying to bring with you? What can wake their spirit up so they feel part of the process and have some ownership in that journey? So for me, what I'm saying is, as a multidisciplinary scientist, 3 masters, 2 PhDs, I'm a little bit knowledged out myself in that, and I find that the way to bring the people is to tell the story a different way. You have to touch the hearts of the people, the spirit. I mean, we're in a very big crisis at the moment in our nation, just from cost of living. Ordinary, everyday people are struggling. So what is your story that's going to capture them and say, hey, maybe I should listen to Brad, Anne or Warren. Maybe there's something there. So I'm just giving a plug that we need to tell these stories through multiple ways. And what I'm seeing is that, in a way, how much more science do we need to generate to tell the world that we're effing up? Seriously. Thank you.
Can I actually throw to Bradley, if you don't mind, because Brad missed out on the previous question. Do you have any comments that you would add to that big question of how do we alert people to the many crises, isn't it, that are around us?
Yeah, that's a great question, but I think it's the old Aussie tradition of only responding or reacting to a crisis, and we need, as you mentioned, the tipping point. That could be it, where we tip over. And that's when we start realising that, the way we're doing things hasn't worked. That you look at just in the last 50 years, the thousands of kilometre blue-green algal bloom brought water reform. Yeah. The two worst on record climate droughts, climate change droughts, we're sort of getting action now. Fish kill 1, fish kill 2.0, and we're heading for fish kill 3.0. What do? We do an inquiry. We do, an inquiry into what caused it. We know what caused it, but I suppose the elephant in the room is we're not dealing with that elephant. Yeah. If there is that crisis, which could be just around the corner, that's when Australia will sort of get its act together and do something. But which is sad. We should be proactive in that space. And, you look at governments and funding, it's all cycle-based, and our cycles, Anne and I and Kat, we did a paper on government cycles affecting water, and that's the thing. Let's involve Aboriginal people in water. All right, let's cut that. Let's involve Aboriginal people in water. Let's cut that. So that cycle of government has to stop as well and think beyond its term, have the courage to go for a long-term, a 20-year recovery plan for a certain species, or we're going to see more and more species on the threatened species list, but there's no money to do stuff. So that next big crisis could be around the corner, and we might get some action. Yeah, it's hard to. We don't do the Aussie way is not to be proactive. Yeah. It's not a good answer, but it's quite depressing. But I think it's a real challenge for us. Yeah.
Certainly realistic reflection of the current situation. Thank you. Would you mind if we go to the next question? Now, I think it was the young woman who's been waiting as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Chris Hubbard. I'm from Ngunnawal and Andrew country here. I would just like to and thank you for your brilliant presentations and ask, I suppose, about how do you foresee Indigenous involvement in international negotiations, which do drive a lot of Australian water and country policy?
International negotiations. Anne, you've mentioned IPBES and a couple of the other big processes. Is there a change in those kinds of big domains that you're seeing? Or do we feel that...
up. Yeah, if it's up, it's on. Yeah.
That it's just more of the same?
Up on. Look, there are many, many international instruments, and including the International Court of Justice. Well, one of the things that I believe is that everything is place-based. We have to transform the system that we're embedded in. And how do we do that? So we have these things. I mean, we've got Nagoda Protocol, which we haven't signed off on. We've got United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, which has not been domesticated in Australian law. We've got all of these things. And I think it provides a benchmark of what the global standard should be. So I think the challenge is how do we embed that in the systems thinking that we have, particularly politically, in this country. Indigenous people are awake to these mechanisms that are out there. They've, in a way, been able to bypass even the court system and go directly to the International Court of Justice, such as with the Torres Strait Island, but also other Indigenous stories around native title. But the fact is that you then need to come back and get a remedy from this country. So for me, everything is place-based. These standards are there, we can aspire to them. But I think the challenge is really how do we transform these systems that are so oppressive, not just to Indigenous people, but to our ordinary Australians as well. So I think it's great having standards, but the challenge is how do you transform that system? And I have, obviously I'm thinking, about peace to war, and understanding the strategies of war, because as a leader, that's what we need to be also prepared with. One of the things that I see is, trying to have these negotiations, publishing, bringing the people with us, but at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the politics of economics and how that grounds development in this country in such an unjust way that we can't even trickle down some of that profit to lift the burden of cost of living for all of our people. So it's really a way to go, okay, those standards are there, how do we transform the system? And obviously one of the things is that we work from a premise of peace, but we also understand strategic litigation. And if it means that that's a way of getting your voice heard, then people will choose that route. So what I'm saying is that they're there, they're aspirational, they're great, they give us a benchmark. Well, what we're talking about is how do we bring that back? And so the UNDRIP, even though it has not been domesticated in Australian law, has been used as rules of evidence in court cases to bring justice for Indigenous people. So I think that's a mechanism there. So that's, a way of doing that. But we're talking about how do we go from peace to war. And I think one of the things in terms of being brave, particularly around rivers as being ancestral beings, is that in WA, I'm not sure if any of you heard about it, but last year, the State Arbitration Tribunal, we had traditional owners come to the government. The Minister for Indigenous Affairs took up the story that if Mr Forrest was to build 10 weirs down the Ashburton River, it would kill that ancestral being. And so what I'm saying is that Aboriginal people are leading these ways. They're being brave, they're moving these things. It's not a legal precedence unless Mr Forrest takes it to another level of court justice, and then it becomes a precedence. But the point I'm making is that brave people are pushing boundaries, looking at international instruments, seeing how they could have impact in this country, but also being creative, as I said, with the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and bringing that into legal cases as rules of evidence to be able to seek justice. So I think they're there, they're a great idea, but the point I want to make is everything is place-based. If we want the revolution, it has to start from where you're at, and you've got to mobilise not just Indigenous people, but everybody else who has a right and a responsibility to care for country and place.
Thank you. Any comments, Warren or Brad, before we move on? We've got one.
Just quickly, I think we as a cohort of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia, we're slowly getting to the international stage. I had the great privilege and honour to go to the UN. I even wore this shirt at the UN, into the big house, in the General Assembly, and I suppose it's we're getting that. But there was little things like there was a pre-Indigenous summit before the UN Water Conference, which took 46 years, I think, to happen from the last one, and the Indigenous cohort come up with a declaration, but Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people weren't invited to that development of that declaration because we don't have a treaty. And so we were excluded as Aboriginal people from Indigenous declaration because we didn't have a treaty. So we put our 2 bobs worth in. We had 3 minutes at that little pre-conference action, but it was a declaration that went to be tabled at the UN. But I think it's because we're so bloody far away from anything. We're a little island west of New Zealand. They were part of the treaty negotiations. and declaration. So we're just this little island west of New Zealand, Aotearoa. But I think, you know, and I've had the great honour as well, you know, with support from the Australian Water Partnership to go to World Water Week. And, you know, we've managed to, because the first time we went was just sort of after COVID, and the Sami people of Sweden weren't invited to World Water Week. And I suppose now, this year, hopefully we will see, you know, 3 years down the track, is that the Sami will have potentially sessions, might be on the main stage. So I suppose that progress of supporting other Indigenous groups to raise their voice and be part of that process, you know, World Water Week could be different next year again. You know, it could have a real Sami flavour. So I suppose that could be back to that original question. Like, that's a positive story, you know, that we've seen where we've worked together as Indigenous people. You know, it was a Pacific group of us, of Indigenous people, and yeah, we went to Stockholm, and yeah, AWP paid for Sami people to attend a conference in Sweden. Like, that's just insane. So yeah, that's unbelievable from our point of view and the government's point of view. But I suppose for us to then see the Sami people have a voice in World Water Week, which is, you know, later this year, is, you know, it's a good feeling. But I hope that momentum stays. Yeah.
So I think we can take from that the international domain is not a panacea for, you know, resolving the really deep, complex challenges that we've been talking about. We have time for one last question, John.
John Williams, I'd just like to go downscale a bit and pick up what Warren said was the good news story, where you actually did go through a consultation process in Queensland. You saw real progress. I'd just like to ask you, I see the experience that Anne talked about, and I was involved in the catchment management and regional delivery of water sharing plans where the community could be actively engaged. Do you think there's any room for us getting and learning from what we did in earlier when we had water sharing plans based on regional bodies in Victoria and New South Wales particularly? Do you see any way forward where we can actually get governance where we do have the process that Warren started to speak about and Anne alluded to, where there is a way to deal with the power structures that exist? Because in all the things I've heard you say, it's the power distribution and how that's managed through a governance process that will give you some space for a voice. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the way through it, my initial thoughts is that government is wanting to engage with First Nations communities in the way that government works. So we want our mob to be like they are, because it's a familiar, controlled environment where they can apply their set of rules and things like that. So I think the first shift is like I say, that shift away, like that happened in Queensland, where it's a shift of process and mentality about how we're going to approach this and how we're going to dignify these people. You mean having the Commonwealth having a model where they engage one delegate from the Kamilaroi-Gomeroi Nation is just absurd. Like, it's a massive space. The same with Wiradjuri, but this is the model that they had and they used. And look, there was some contributing factors to that around the partnerships and stuff that they developed and set those models up. So, you mean, there's an element of ownership on both sides. But it's really, I'd say, getting past the fear of actually what the knowledge and the power that's going to come from those conversations. I think they're actually frightened. There's nothing frightens, you know, a politician or a senior bureaucrat more than a smart blackfella, right? You know what I mean? It does. But, you know, I mean, it's about, you know, when they come. And what I found by using that community governance approach was that it woke up those voices. It's woken the beast up. So I've been to 24 communities, as I said, since September last year, talking about water. Some of those communities, there's 2 or 3 conversations, some only 1. So I'm anticipating about 40 different, you know, sit-down conversations. And people for the first time, some of them for the first time, are being spoken to about Murray-Darling Basin. I go, how can you be... Murray-Darling Basin Authority has never been to Mungandai. Never. They never went to that community. Right? So they're part of two major water resource plans. So Darwin-Darling and... Darwin-Darling, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And I'm getting ahead of myself. And the border rivers. So they're in both those.
Warren, can you just tell me, who owns the water sharing plan?
So Darwin-Darling, got it out that time. That's New South Wales. The border rivers, if you're on... The states. And this is one of the other issues, is depending where you live, 5 states control your water. So, and that's the other call from community, is that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority needs to be an authority. They actually need to be in charge of the basin. So it needs to be one set of legislation, and this is what the mob's saying, the community's saying, one set of legislation, one set of rules for water, and the states can write policy about what they do with the water, but there should only be one set of legislation. I'm not, a legal mind or that, but I'm sitting in Broken Hill talking to the Barkindji mob out there, and they talk about the water in Menindee Lakes, and when it's above a certain level, South Australia law controls that water. It's only when it gets... How can South Australia control the water for the mob in Menindee? I mean, it doesn't... None of that makes sense. But they go to talk to South Australia and they say, no, you're in New South Wales, go talk to your lot. Yeah, but hang on, they don't have control of the water at the moment. And it's that ambiguous, it's just silly. And what they say, one piece of legislation that covers the whole basin, top to bottom, and then there can be policy and that sits underneath that.
Yeah, it's interesting because John brought this question up a little earlier before I came down to the room. And it took me back 15 years ago. There was a case in the Kimberley, I don't know if any of you know about it, but they were going to build the largest LNG precinct in the world, bigger than Qatar, 60 k's just out of our community. Everything was sold up, sounded like it was all a done deal. The state government came in, they created a development zone, they cut it out of local government so they had total control of it. The big corporations were very, very nervous. They had signed on to agreement. It was all looked like it was ready to go. I was living quietly 15 years ago on my community, building a beautiful centre and getting ready to create dialogue with a whole lot of people. And then I realised what was happening to my home. Broome is my home. I'm born in Broome, but the river is my country. And I saw all the green groups coming in and it was just utter chaos. And I thought, my goodness, what's happening here? And what really was the big change of plan was in Broome. Broome is a very unique place. It's a place in this country that the White Australia policy did not apply because they needed to indenture the Asian labour. So Broome was very unique in terms of we had many men that came from all over the world that married beautiful Aboriginal women and created what we call the old families of Broome. And so the old families got together and they thought, how are we going to stop this? Because what's coming is inevitable. The state agreements were locked in, local government, the land had been zoned out. It was all like a done deal. The Kimberley Land Council was very much wanting to get an agreement in terms of how some of the profits could so-called filter down to empower our people. But so what the old families of Broome did said, well, we no longer just on our own go to this beautiful place, recreate, camp, fish. Other families are coming there. White families, non-Indigenous families, they come there. They love that place. So we created a concept called the Families of Broome, and that's what stopped everything. It just stopped it dead in its track because people felt valued. They had a voice. They came together. They were united. It's all the principles of what Paulo Freire talks about against anti-dialogic action, conflict, all of these things that are conquest, come in, take over, tell the people what you're going to do to them, as opposed to create dialogue, have a cooperative way that we can bring people with us, Forget about the divide and conquer and the manipulation. We all love that place. And that transformed the situation. You would not believe how much was riding on what was going to happen. So, I see that governments are there, they assert their rights, they tell the people what to do, but it's the people who vote the government in. And I think really when we're talking about, we have to transform the masses. We have to wake them up and say that this is about all of us equally. And when we get on that journey, what is the reciprocal relationship you have with Indigenous people to invest in us, to bring us with you? So my coalition of hope is, I've got scientists, I've got technical people, I've got amazing communication people, we can do all that. But unless you bring the people with you, I don't believe you can get the transformation. And this is what I'm saying is, how do we wake up our people? And climate change is doing that. This climate chaos, this climate uncertainty, what it's doing when this situation occurs, whether it's a bushfire, whether it's a flood, is that the community will come together and they will work together. And sure, people will come in and they'll go out. But I think it creates this sense that we are a collective. We are we, not me. And so for me, it's about, as I said, waking up the people, bringing the people with us, looking at how do you transform these short 3-year election cycles, knowing that possibly we're heading into one by the end of this year. So there's a very big questions. And as I want to go back to the main point I'm talking about, which is the politics of economics. And I mentioned this a little earlier in terms of everyone is struggling in this country, everyone. And here we are ready to weaponise and buy submarines that will probably be obsolete when a stroke of the pen could mean that we could have distributed justice and everybody have a good life in this country. Don't get me on a conversation around super tax because it got Mr. Rudd sacked. But when you look at what we're doing with oil and gas and the tax that's coming out of that and how these companies are maximising their profit by on-selling into the international market, my mother said to me a long time before she passed, she said, in terms of whiteness, are they really the peak of civilization? They are uncivilized. They can't seem to create an economic system that allows distribution of equity. Are they really in charge? No, they're not. The multinational companies are. And so we need a different way to bring the people with us. And as I said, when you wake up the human spirit, when you wake up and ignite people, we can get transformation. And so I don't really see a difference between Liberal and Labor government. The value sets seem to come together and they merge. So it's no longer two-party principles that make us think, when we waste so much time in question time in Parliament, when we could be having a way to come together to mobilise that thinking so that we get the best for our people on the ground with Indigenous people being thought about firstly. So we can do this.
Well, we have gone well over time. Thank you to all of our amazing panellists for your insights, your sharing, your wisdom, and everything that's brought all of this fabulous thread together under the banner of Water for Peace. I think, Anne, in your final comments there is a I guess there's a pathway for peace in there, the unity, the dialogue, the coming together, and that's what we should all be focusing on and supporting each other in. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panellists. We do have some time to mingle, and if you had a burning question that you weren't able to ask so far, then you may have some time to come and speak with our panellists in the informal conversation space that we've got now. I can see it's been a bit tantalising as I've been focusing on our panel. I keep seeing these amazing drinks and food going out outside. We do have the launch of our cultural residency to follow, but I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with the program and give everybody a breather for 5 minutes to stand up, to stretch your legs, to maybe go and grab a drink or a snack, and then come back inside and we will launch our cultural residency for the Institute for Water Futures. Once again, please join me in thanking the wonderful speakers that we've had here today.